Zoro killing Kaido, also known as ZKK, is a theory that has been a big part of the One Piece community for a very long time. In fact, longer than I myself have been in the community making videos. Over the years, it has gained unbelievable amounts of attention and evolved into a topic of extreme controversy. I have been heavily associated with this theory since I first began making videos, and I was always adamant in my belief that it was going to happen because, from my perspective, everything seemed to be pointing in that direction. But the Wano arc has come to a close and Zoro did not kill Kaido.
Shame. 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 Shame.
I have made 2 videos on this theory in the past, the most recent one being over 2 years old. Whether I like it or not, I'm always going to be associated with this theory and I'm fine with that. Even though it didn't happen, I'm fine with being the guy who thought it would and was wrong the entire time. To be perfectly honest, I didn't really want to make this video because it's obvious what kind of reception it's going to receive, and I can already see the jokes like, damn, this nigga spent 2 hours talking about a theory that didn't happen. And shit, I guess that's exactly what I'm doing because I truly do feel like it is my duty to take the L on this and address ZKK after years of being associated with it. I want to make a comeback to making content regularly on all sorts of media that I love, but making this video is an absolute necessity before I can do any of that. And of course, I want to address the hate and extreme disregard ZKK as a theory has received over the years. I have had my intelligence insulted, been called an idiot, somebody who reads with their eyes closed. I mean, whatever condescending diss there is out there, you name it, somebody has called me that for believing in this theory. And it's not like those insults bother me because, I mean, we're on the internet. Platforms like Twitter are practically engineered to promote that sort of negativity, but I have to make this video because talking about something like this on Twitter or just on a stream or something, it's not the right kind of format. I need to communicate my thoughts properly on this idea because it is a brazen idea. It's a crazy idea. The purpose of this video is to communicate the thought process behind ZKK as a theory, why it is something that so many people believed in so adamantly, and why I still believe that it would have succeeded in being an incredibly fitting conclusion for the Wano arc. It sounded crazy, unbelievable, and even impossible, but it was never stupid. And because Zoro didn't kill Kaido, a lot of people believe their hate for the theory has been validated, and that is the result of people not really understanding what makes the theory good to begin with, or even understanding ZKK as a theory. Even if you're familiar with this theory and some of the evidence that myself or other people have used to push it in the past, I urge you to please watch this video in its entirety. I have worked on this video for literally months. This is going to be an amalgamation of all the theory crafting from multiple people, not just myself, packed into one massive documentary. It's going to be split into several chapters which you can navigate through the timestamps in the description, because this is definitely going to be a long one and I don't expect any of you to watch it in one viewing. If you don't care to hear me out and want to just be negative, by all means feel free to dislike the video, leave a hateful comment, Lord knows you have definitely earned it. For those who do care to hear me out though, grab a snack or something, grab a drink, get comfortable and enjoy. This is Zoro killing Kaido, the documentary. I want you to think about the most compelling fan theories you've ever seen. What made them so good? What made you believe that this idea is exactly what the author had been working towards all along? I think it boils down to 3 essential elements: evidence, plausibility, and consistency. These are the 3 fundamental aspects of a compelling theory. Evidence consists of anything that supports your claim. Plausibility is the measure of likelihood the author is going to write whatever it is you're suggesting, and consistency is the standard of being coherent with everything that already exists within the story. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Themes, structure, the author's writing style, everything has to be considered. A good theory follows story, character, and author consistency. Nobody's going to believe in an idea that doesn't sound like something the author would write, or an idea that goes against the precedents that have been set for the story and the characters within it. Beyond these 3 fundamental criteria, there is a 4th that I personally consider to be the most important of them all: entertainment. A good theory is always intellectually stimulating and gives you that light bulb feeling where everything clicks and just makes perfect sense. But this fourth criteria is only possible when the first three essential criteria have been met. Something that doesn't use canonical evidence in support of its claims is not a theory but more like fan fiction. A theory that doesn't seem plausible and feels far too stretched from reality is just an idea that might sound cool but is most likely never going to happen. And a theory that isn't consistent with the framework of the story it is about is more like a projection of what you want to happen rather than a believable speculation of what could actually happen. To me, the theory of Zoro killing Kaido checked these four criteria absolutely flawlessly, which is what made me such an avid believer. I've never invested in an idea as much as I did this one, and even though it never came to fruition, I still consider this to be the greatest fan theory I've ever seen. Watch this video until the end and I guarantee you will completely understand why I feel this way. Before I start explaining things in extensive detail, I want to establish what this theory was even about, in simple terms. Just saying Zoro killing Kaido is one thing, but why? Why would Zoro, a character who we've never actually seen kill an enemy before, kill arguably the most important antagonist of the story thus far? The core of this theory is that Zoro would decapitate Kaido atop the flower capital, mirroring Ryuma's legendary feat of slaying a dragon. There are countless things within the story and outside of the story that have pointed in this direction. This would by no means be a 1v1 battle, and Luffy would still probably play the most prominent role in the fight. Not only would Zoro get absolutely destroyed by Kaido in a 1v1 scenario, there's just no way Oda would ever write a conflict involving the main antagonist without including Luffy. Nobody with an inkling of sanity would suggest something that unbelievable. Being the one to land the final killing blow in a group fight though, that is something very plausible, and we're going to be diving into all the reasons I believe this was the ideal conclusion for the Battle of Onigashima. These reasons include Zoro's potential Shimotsuki lineage, his motivations to fight Kaido, the fact I strongly believe Kaido needed to die, the entire existence of Ryuma as a character and idea, various mythological concepts that tie heavily into the narrative of Wano, statements from the Vivre cards, magazines and other third-party sources of One Piece information, my perception of Oda's writing style, and of course the countless themes explored in this arc and how Zoro killing Kaido is an idea that encompasses so many of them. We're going to be diving into the nitty-gritty of all of this in just a few moments, but before that, we have to ask ourselves, one of my goals in this video is to paint an outline of Wano's thematic tapestry. If you know me, then you know I'm not the biggest fan of Wano. I'm not going to be diving into my criticisms in this video since I am planning to make a full retrospective Wano analysis, but I will say, despite my problems, I am truly amazed by how dense Wano is. It is easily the densest arc in the story from a thematic standpoint. To truly understand the story of Wano, one has to understand the various themes presented by Oda and how they tie into every beat of this narrative. For now, I'm going to be focusing on analysing Wano's theming rather than talking about ZKK. Once I have established what Wano's all about from a thematic and structural standpoint, I will then tie it all into the theory. I managed to boil down the arc's ideas into 8 main themes: death and rebirth, leadership and the value of subordinates, loyalty and betrayal, freedom and oppression, the passage of time, the strength of one's spirit, fate or destiny, and lastly, identity. The theme of death arguably plays the most prominent role in the framework of Wano's theming. Death is a theme that has always been explored in this story, but Wano takes it to the next level. Characters such as Kaido, Luffy, Zoro, the Scabbards, Oden, Yasui, Momonosuke, hell, every single one of the samurai have this theme of death written into their roles within Wano. The Fire Festival is literally about paying remembrance to the dead. The opening chapter of Wano is titled Seppuku, and it has a strong focus on death, with the main message deriving around the idea that a samurai's true worth is in his death. This sets the stage for what this arc is going to be about. As we know, Kaido strongly shares that sentiment, stating that death is what completes a person in chapter 994. This is also why Kaido is so fascinated by the samurai and holds characters like Roger, Oden and Whitebeard to such a high pedestal. They are people who cemented their legacies through their deaths and thus, as Kaido perceives it, have completed themselves. A big idea in One Piece is that a man dies when he is forgotten, and so Kaido wishes to leave an everlasting impact on the world by dying a glorious death that will echo throughout the ages. I feel like Kaido is vastly misunderstood because he doesn't just want to die. His philosophy isn't that simple. You can't just die any death and expect to be completed. It has to be meaningful. This line from Law and Doflamingo should explain things pretty perfectly. The weak do not get to choose how they die. There's nothing glorious about dying in a situation where you wanted to live, which is exactly why Kaido values strength above all else. This can be seen in the Beast Pirates' structure as a strength-based meritocracy. Roger chose his way of death and went out in the grandest fashion possible, changing the world forever, never to be forgotten. Oden chose his way of death and went out in the grandest fashion possible, leaving an everlasting impact on not only his supporters but Kaido himself, never to be forgotten. Whitebeard chose his way of... Okay, I think you got the gist. The theme of death within Wano is incredibly particular depending on the character it is associated with. I think it's very obvious that Kaido's perspective on death is supposed to be very wrong and completely misses what actually made the deaths of Roger, Oden and Whitebeard so glorious. Kaido wants to start the biggest war in the world and die a glorious death, but he fails to understand that a glorious death is derivative of what you value. Roger died ushering in a new era of piracy in order to one day bring the dawn and change the world for the better. Oden died to save the lives of his retainers, protecting those he cares about. Whitebeard died also ushering in a new era, reigniting the flame Roger sparked and saving the life of Luffy, the man who will one day bring the dawn. What makes these deaths so glorious isn't the scale or the impact on the world, but rather the fact that they died sticking firm to their beliefs and protecting the things they value. Kaido doesn't value anything outside of his own warped and idealized perception of death. All Kaido cares about is being viewed as great and leaving a big impact, but he fails to understand that in order to do so, he must die meaningfully. That's why he tries to commit suicide by jumping off a sky island. Kaido really is just one of those guys who is more obsessed with something being cool than actually having substance. And that is exactly why I believe that the natural conclusion for Kaido's character arc was to die a pathetic death, something that isn't remarkable in the slightest and holds no value to him. The problem with defeat is so few can accept it when it arrives. That line from Kaido felt like direct and ironic setup for the ending to his journey, where that line actually ends up applying to him and he struggles to accept death and defeat because of how pathetic it seems to him. Surrender your name and be as a child. This is the samurai tradition of Sunachi, to completely discard the value of your life by surrendering your name and charging at whatever obstacle you face with courage and fearlessness at the prospect of death. The idea behind Sunachi is that nothing you have ever known and ever will know matters except for the problem that is right before your eyes, which creates this pretty cool dichotomy of worth. A meaningful death can only be accomplished by considering your life to be meaningless. That is the philosophy of Wano Samurai, and Sunachi is a battle cry used to encapsulate this idea and build courage in the hearts of whoever uses it. Sunachi is something very integral to the narrative of Wano, even having a massive involvement in Zoro's fight against King, because the way he was able to win is completely in line with the samurai philosophy of Sunachi. The Scabbards are the prime example of people considering their lives meaningless in comparison to the cause they are fighting for. Time and time again, it has made clear that this battle of Onigashima is do or die for our protagonists. They even sank their ships the second they arrived because they wouldn't be needing them. Either they win on this fateful night, or they die. Luffy in Udon has this moment where he proudly proclaims that the only one who gets to decide where he will die is himself. Whilst Kaido craves death, Luffy clings to life since he doesn't want to die until he has achieved his dreams. This brings us on to the second half of this theme, rebirth. This isn't as deeply explored as death in the arc, but there are various instances where rebirth has a role to play. For example, Luffy inheriting Ace's will and delivering on Ace's promise to Tama in his stead could be viewed as a form of rebirth. The Scabbards receiving their own graves after travelling to the future makes their return feel like some sort of rebirth to the citizens of Wano. Luffy's quote-unquote death in chapter 1042 that segued into his Devil Fruit awakening and the Nika reveal can very well be considered a form of rebirth. His voice was extinguished, and as far as I can tell, Luffy returns from the dead as a completely different figure, as the second coming of Joy Boy. Like I said, rebirth isn't anywhere near as deeply explored as death, so there isn't much to talk about in regards to it, but I thought it was necessary to at least mention considering how it ties into the theory. This theme is absolutely crucial to the story of Wano, especially in relation to Luffy and Kaido. An integral aspect of Kaido's character is that unlike most big bads in a story, he would rather break people's wills and have them submit to him than kill them. Kaido understands the value of strong subordinates and would rather muster them into his own crew than waste their potential by killing them. This is why the Udon prison exists, to break the wills of his enemies and highlight how futile their attempts at defeating him actually are. Kaido wanted to recruit Ashura Doji, he wanted to recruit Luffy after defeating him in Act 1, and I'm sure there are more examples of this. Even in the transitional chapters between acts, we have a focus on leadership, with chapter 925 focusing on Moria's relationship with Absalom and how much he valued his crewmate, as well as chapter 957 focusing on Zebek, arguably one of the greatest leaders in the history of the series by virtue of the fact he was capable of leading the absolute best the pirate world had to offer. In Act 1 we get Luffy and Zoro vs Hawkins. This fight is pretty underrated from a thematic standpoint. Hawkins' Devil Fruit abilities represent a twisted relationship between himself as a headliner and the gifters and other beast pirates that follow him. Even as a captain of his own crew, he would use this ability that renders his followers' lives a stand-in for his own. This relationship is terrible for obvious reasons, but it sets up a key aspect of this arc's thematic framework. What is a good leader? What are good subordinates? The first antagonist of the arc being somebody of weak will who submitted themselves to Kaido and also has this ability that completely juxtaposes Luffy's philosophies when it comes to his subordinates, or in his eyes his comrades, couldn't be more perfect. Hawkins treats his subordinates like a number. The more there are, the longer they can keep him alive as their mastermind. Luffy looks at his crewmates as people who make up for his shortcomings, valuing them for their specific strengths and the ways they benefit his journey to becoming the Pirate King. Kaido views his subordinates as tools for the massive war he intends to orchestrate. The value of subordinates in the eyes of Kaido is that they are a means to an end. He is using them for his own goals, and that also starkly contrasts with Luffy, who would much rather sacrifice his ambitions than let one of his subordinates down. Kaido's problems extend to his entire crew, whereas Luffy's approach at leadership is to make his crew's problems his problems. That is the key difference between Luffy and Kaido in relation to this theme. Momonosuke's entire character arc in Wano is about becoming a worthy leader for the nation of Wano by growing from just a mere figurehead and turning into a person much like Luffy, who embraces all the problems of his people and makes it his own individual responsibility to deal with these problems. That's why Momonosuke, when we are first introduced to him, is a crybaby who would much rather let everyone do everything for him, and now when we last see him, he is a strong-willed leader who refuses assistance from Yamato as he attempts to fight off the nation's first outside threat after Kaido in the form of a Navy Admiral. Leadership is absolutely essential to the Wano arc, but the value of subordinates is what specifically ties into this theory, and of course that will be discussed later in the video. First, let's talk about loyalty. The people of Wano are established to value loyalty very deeply. There are many people in Wano who still believed in Toki's words and waited 20 years for the fateful night she prophesied. These loyal followers of the Kozuki clan mark their ankles with a moon tattoo, and the moon has been used as a symbol of loyalty by Oda in the past in Ben Beckman's Vivre card describing his relationship with Shanks. Back in Zoro, when we were first introduced to the Minks, we received one of the most impactful moments of the story, which was of course the demonstration of the Minks' loyalty. Loyalty is the main thing that sets apart our protagonists from the antagonists in the arc. It is the backbone of the alliance's integrity, and without a mutual trust and loyalty between everybody, they would have never hoped to have even arrived at Onigashima, let alone win the battle. But of course, that isn't to say the alliance didn't have its issues in regards to loyalty. There was a traitor from the very beginning, which I guess is the perfect segue into the betrayal half of this section. There have been countless instances of betrayal in this arc, which is expected of a conflict where both sides are made up of massive alliances. There are hundreds of characters involved in this arc, and we have had a very heavy emphasis on individual agendas, with characters serving their own interests. This is mainly found in the antagonist side of the cast. Apu setting up Kid and Hawkins, Kyoshiro, who was actually Denjiro, betraying Orochi, Orochi, who owed everything to Oden, betraying him, Kaido betraying Orochi, X-Drake betraying Kaido, the list goes on. I honestly believe there was very clear setup for the Yonko alliance between Kaido and Big Mom to also fall flat in the form of a betrayal from one of the two, but that unfortunately didn't happen. Looking at the protagonist side though, we have one betrayal that really stands out in comparison to every other betrayal we've had in the arc. Kanjuro's betrayal of the Scabbards in his lifelong scheme that involved spying from within them for decades. In a conflict where the stakes feel so high and the odds are completely stacked against our protagonists, loyalty is of the utmost importance. The country of Wano is established as a setting of complete tragedy. It was once a country that flourished all over, but now only the flower capital where Orochi resides remains a decent place. Everywhere else has been reduced to a lawless wasteland by the efforts of Kaido and his organization. The schools of the flower capital are stained by propaganda and misinformation, literally painting the Kozuki as bad people who were overthrown by the good Orochi. And a lot of the oppression within this arc is embodied by the hunger felt by poor innocent civilians. The first real struggle that we and Luffy are introduced to is the hunger of Tama and the people of Wano. It is established that the water is dirty because of Kaido's weapons factories polluting everything, which means the animals roaming around are toxic and inedible. Kaido and Orochi have their own private food source, a farm with clean water, rice, fish, meat, any food you could dream of. And to make that fact even worse, the private farm that Orochi and Kaido use was something the late Kozuki Oden created to feed the poor people of Kuri. That is the trigger for Luffy's first real motivation in Wano, because despite their extreme hunger, the people of Wano are very generous to one another and still try to feed not only each other, but their guests, including Luffy. Wano has a very strict class system. The poorer people from the less fortunate towns have very few rights, if any at all. Freedom has always been one of the central themes of One Piece, perfectly embodied by our protagonist, who cannot stand to see people's freedoms being stripped away from them. Luffy loses his mind when he finds out that Holden was abusing Tama with pliers. The oppressive treatment that the innocent citizens of Wano face is one of the strongest emotional motivators for our protagonist. It's the reason why the Straw Hats have involved themselves in this conflict, taking place on a closed off island that, for all intents and purposes, doesn't really matter to them. Of course, this is where Kaido is, and Luffy wants to defeat him on his journey to become the Pirate King, but that alone isn't enough for Luffy to harbour the necessary emotion to go to such extreme lengths. It's the oppression of the innocent people of Wano that drives Luffy to want to make a difference in this country. And that isn't new. We've had this arc formula multiple times in the past. Luffy is the warrior of liberation, whether it be a small town or a massive nation. If Luffy sees people suffering, he is going to try and do something about it. It is in his nature, and the Wano arc takes this to a complete new level by presenting the backbone of this oppression in the form of malnourishment. The hunger and lack of food for the innocent civilians of Wano, despite there being so much of it for the bad guys, is exactly what drives Luffy like never before. Interestingly enough, this theme has been clearly outlined as an essential aspect of One Piece's narrative framework, But Wano is the first arc we actually see it explored. In chapter 100 we receive a quote from none other than the Pirate King, Gold D. Roger. An inherited strength of will, one's dreams, the ebb and flow of the ages. As long as people hunger for freedom, these things will exist. These three ideas are absolutely crucial to the story Oda wishes to tell. Inherited will is something we see in almost every arc of the series, and it plays a massive role in almost every one of the Straw Hat's characters. The same can be said for dreams. Every Straw Hat has massive ambitions, and the entire narrative of One Piece would cease to exist if not for the countless dreams held by its cast. But the ebb and flow of the ages, which I'll just be referring to as the passage of time, that is something we gain no real further exploration on after receiving this quote. Until Wano. This is the arc where a time fruit is introduced, and we have characters that literally travelled through time. Of course, Toki's devil fruit only allows people to travel forward in time and not back in time, which is a very important distinction, because had her fruit allowed someone to travel back in time, it would not only cause a lot of potential plot holes in the series, but it would completely invalidate that all-important quote from Roger. The point is that the passage of time cannot be stopped, and Wano has a strong focus on this idea by consistently telling us how much things have changed in the last 2 decades. The industrialization of the country through factories, the regression of mighty figures like Yasui and Hyogoro, the constant decline of Wano's prosperity from a country that used to be brimming with life and natural resources into practically a wasteland. This passage of time is crucial to the narrative of Wano because despite all these changes and all this time spent in constant oppression, there are still so many supporters of the Kozuki clan. So many people who have endured and still believe in Toki's prophecy, patiently waiting for the day Kaido and Orochi are to be taken down. But the most important part of this theme to me is, without a doubt, the focus on the new generation of pirates overcoming the old generation. The allied efforts of Luffy, Law and Kid versus Kaido and Big Mom, quite literally the pinnacles of both their generations, with the exception of Blackbeard of course. This arc has a very strong focus on the fact that Kaido and Big Mom's time is over. They've spent decades as pirates and have achieved some incredible things over the years, but their dreams of attaining the One Piece are over. They are defeated here by the only people who have a true shot at actually finding the One Piece, which is actually just Luffy, but yeah. The very first thing that happens in the Wano arc is Luffy and the rest of the Straw Hats riding a koi fish up a waterfall. The Chinese koi fish waterfall legend is a story of perseverance and persistence. Willpower, or the strength of one's spirit, has always been a central theme to the majority of One Piece story arcs. It's Luffy's spirit that makes him so special and stand head and shoulders above the rest of his competition. His undying will to never give up and face all of his challenges head first. In the Wano arc, this is especially true. I like to look at Act 1 when it comes to understanding the themes of this arc because it lays the foundation of what's to come, especially thematically. Hawkins' words to Luffy and Zoro about submission sets the stage for what kind of conflict this arc will contain. Either prove yourself superior to Kaido or join him as an underling, and we all knew the choice our protagonists would make. Breaking people's wills and hopes is a central goal of the antagonist in this arc. Destroying the ruins of Oden Castle is an example of this. Another example is how Kaido wishes to break the will of his enemies by placing them in prison or enslaving them so that they may never have foolish hopes of challenging him again. The samurai of Wano are incredibly strong-willed people, or at least they were before 20 years of constant belittlement and oppression. And what makes this even worse is the fact that Orochi, arguably the main reason for the country's downfall, is established to be an incredibly fearful individual with very little strength of spirit. He fears Toki's prophecy coming to fruition and the return of the 9 red scabbards. He fears his enemies, he fears death, he fears almost everything. And like I said earlier, our protagonists are the complete opposite. They believe. Despite overwhelming odds, they believe they can take down Kaido and would have attempted to do so even without the help of the Straw Hats, Kid, Law, and everybody else who worked against Kaido in the Battle of Onigashima. Of course, it's Luffy and the rest of the Straw Hats' willpower that motivates them and strengthens their spirits, but they still have incredible willpower without that assistance. The story of Wano is one that champions a strong spirit. It champions people who dive headfirst into their problems with courage, despite how overwhelming the odds may be. This is one of the most important themes of Wano because its inclusion kinda reshapes the entire story of One Piece. Fate has always been an important theme to this story, but the way it has been handled in the past is very different to the way it was handled in Wano. In Wano, for one of the first times in over 900 chapters, we received prophecies from Toki, from the Sea Kings in the Oden flashback, even Oden's words about a certain group of pirates that would come to save Wano in 20 years. Gear 5 is literally all about the truth behind Luffy's devil fruit and revealing how he is the joy boy of this generation, the one who was prophesied to bring the dawn of the world, which completely changes so much of what we thought we knew about Luffy and his devil fruit. Kozuki Oden was born to boil, the Kurozumi were born to burn. Sorry, I can't say that seriously, but yeah, this arc has a very heavy emphasis on the theme of fate in a way Oda has never done before, and that is a discussion that honestly requires its own video, so I'm not going to be diving too deeply into that here, but if it's something you're interested in, please let me know in the comment section down below. Instead, in this section, I will be outlining some of the most obvious instances in the Wano arc that are entwined with the theme of fate. Kinemon and Momonosuke went through trial after trial and only came out of Punk Hazard alive thanks to the Straw Hats. The way Kinemon describes this in chapter 920 really makes it feel as if their meeting was destined. The night of the Fire Festival was established as a night of prophecy right from the beginning of the arc. With his introduction, Kyoshiro tells us of Toki's final words, the prophecy that has the Shogun Orochi absolutely terrified. Yasui's gut instinct about Zoro could be attributed to fate. Oden awaited a future over 20 years from his death where the land of Wano would be opened and Joy Boy would appear. In chapter 968 we get the prophecy of the sovereigns, the birth of Princess Shirahoshi and another sovereign from a distant sea, which is quite obviously in reference to Luffy. Kawamatsu and Hyogoro discuss the fact that Zoro, who so strongly resembles Ryuma, is the one to unknowingly return Shusui to Wano and how that may be a stroke of fate. I'll talk about that specific point a lot deeper later on in the video. The point is that the theme of fate plays a very integral role in this arc's narrative in a way that is honestly like never before in One Piece. And finally, the theme of identity, which is easily the most obvious of the themes explored in Wano. It's tackled from a variety of angles. There are secret identities, alter egos, changing personalities, hidden agendas, people trying to live up to their name, fill their father's shoes. The list goes on. The very beginning of Wano is establishing the Straw Hats' fake identities. Franosuke the carpenter, Usohachi the toad oil salesman, Orobi the geisha, Zorojuro the ronin. We later get Luffy Taro, Sangoro, Onami, and I think there's a couple others that I'm forgetting. These fake identities are used to blend in within Wano and avoid causing any problems before the fateful raid on the Fire Festival. Kyoshiro, who is initially introduced as an antagonist, ends up being Denjiro, one of the 9 red scabbards, as well as Ushimitsu Kozo, the witching hour boy who stole from the rich to feed the poor. Komurasaki, the highest ranking Oiran in all of Wano, ends up being Kozuki Hiyori, the daughter of Oden. Kanjuro, who was initially introduced as a protagonist and member of the 9 red scabbards, is revealed to have been a traitor all along who works for Orochi. Kamozo the manslayer, a street murderer working as a secret assassin for Orochi, ends up being Killer, the partner of Eustace Kid. X-Drake, one of Kaido's headliners, is revealed to be working as an undercover spy for the Marine Secret Special Unit Sword. Onimaru, who was once the companion of the late Shimotsuki daimyo Ushimaru, posed as a human known as Gyukimaru to steal weapons from people and prepare for the upcoming battle. Kawamatsu presents himself as a Kappa, despite being a fishman, to protect his identity, since fishmen are very widely discriminated against. Okiku is established as a tea house waitress before later being revealed as a member of the 9 Red Scabbards. Otoko is introduced as a very cheerful young girl, but we later find out she's a victim of the failed smile fruits, which renders the eater unable of expressing any emotion besides joy. Tenguyama Hitetsu, the Kokoshi doll collector and katana blacksmith, was very recently revealed to be Kozuki Sukiyaki, the father of the late daimyo Kozuki Oden. Sanji is placed in a position where he has to use his Reitsu in order to keep his identity secret and becomes Sober Mask. The Alliance must disguise themselves as beast pirates for the raid on Onigashima to be successful. Even in the Oden flashback, Kurozumi Higurashi is the cause of Oden's defeat and the only reason Orochi became the shogun. She's essentially the mastermind behind the tragedy of Wano, and her devil fruit represents that perfectly. King's identity as a Lunarian has a massive role in his characterization. Momonosuke's entire character arc within Wano is about struggling with his identity as the Kozuki heir to Oden and rightful shogun of Wano. Yamato's entire character is about replicating the man Oden was out of deep admiration for his larger-than-life achievements, as well as trying to escape their identity as the son of Kaido. Big Mom gets amnesia and becomes Olin. Sanji's biggest moment in the Wano arc is all about struggling with his German lineage. The list goes on. We could honestly be here for hours talking about all the different instances in this arc where the theme of identity plays a major role, but I think you guys get the point. I hope I was able to paint a vivid image of Wano's thematic framework in that section of the video. This arc is about far too many things for it to simply be boiled down to just a few sentences, and for the sake of any theory, one must have a solid understanding of the ideas presented by the author. As I discussed previously, one of the most important things for any good theory is for it to be consistent with the author's vision, which includes the themes of the narrative. And so, despite being pretty long-winded, that section is absolutely essential to the points I'm going to be making throughout the rest of the video. It's nearly time, but before we can finally dive into talking about ZKK, there's just one more thing we have to outline. It's no secret that Wano is One Piece's Japanese-themed setting. It combines various aspects of Japan's history, folklore, and mythology to create this atmosphere that is somehow just like Japan, whilst also feeling unique to the adventure fantasy that is One Piece. And that isn't something exclusive to the world building, since this Japanese feel is not only about the location of Wano, but the construction of the arc. Wano has a kabuki play structure, and it is split into 3 separate acts. The curtains open to signify the beginning of an act, and they close to signify the end of one. On top of this, there is a clear connection between the construction of Thriller Bark and Wano, which is absolutely crucial to this theory, and we'll be talking about that later on. Many Japanese folklore and mythological creatures are represented in the Wano arc in some way, shape or form. The main story of this arc takes extreme influence from the Momotaro folktale, a story about a child named Momotaro who fights a band of Oni that reside on an island called, you guessed it, Onigashima. On Momotaro's journey to Onigashima, he meets and befriends a talking dog, monkey, and pheasant who agree to help him with his quest in exchange for a portion of his food, which were kibidango. Of course, the Wano arc is not a one-to-one copy of this folktale, but the similarities are pretty obvious to the point where I don't think I need to explain them. Another folktale is the story of Kintaro, a hero child of superhuman strength that stopped the villain Shuten Doji. This is of course covered in the Oden flashback, where Oden defeats Ashura Doji. There are tons of mythological creatures and concepts littered throughout this arc, such as the Yamato no Orochi represented by Orochi, the Oni represented by Kaido and Yamato, the Tengu represented by Tenguyama Hitetsu, the Kappa represented by Kawamatsu, Enma and Amano Habakiri, Hattori Hanzo, Kitsune represented by Onimaru, Komainu represented by Komachio, the Seiru represented by Kaido's Devil Fruit, Nezumi Kozo represented by Ushimitsu Kozo, the Hanya mask worn by Yamato in her introduction, as well as Kiku, the Hihi Baboon, The Fire Festival itself, I mean, the list goes on. Yeah, we would be here for days if I listed everything out. Even the concept of opening the borders of Wano is something incredibly important to Japan's history. The point is that mythology, folktales, and everything of that sort has a massive role in the narrative of Wano and has a massive role in this theory. Okay, now, finally, the stage has been set. Let the curtains open to the real reason you're watching this video. Zoro killing Kaido, let's get it. There are multiple angles I will be tackling this theory from, so please be sure to watch every single part of this video because the accumulation of all the arguments is what made this theory so strong and believable to me. There are definitely some points which don't sound too convincing in a vacuum, and I already know there's going to be plenty of comments talking about confirmation bias and how these points are weak or forced, but the sheer number of arguments and potential evidence is what made this theory so convincing to me. A few arguments alone is enough, but hundreds of different things suggesting the same outcome is what truly sold me on this theory, and what made me an avid believer over the last few years. Even though it didn't happen, please listen to everything because it's mind-boggling to me just how many things were pointing in this direction, and some part of me still believes that this was Oda's original plan for the arc. Since before Wano even began, it was almost a consensus within the One Piece community that this arc would have the most focus on Zoro out of all the Straw Hats, excluding Luffy of course. And even though Wano has ended and it doesn't really feel like you could call it Zoro's arc, there are countless things pointing towards that being Oda's original idea for this story. One thing that should be made very clear before I start is that the narrative of Wano is clearly much grander than anything Oda has ever written before. Nobody is suggesting that this would be Zoro's arc in the same vein that Whole Cake Island was Sanji's, because there's just far too much going on and far too many characters involved for Zoro to get something like that, where the narrative is completely centered around him. The point is rather that this would be the arc where Zoro gets the most focus out of every Straw Hat by a pretty sizable margin, and new details about his past would be tied into current events. He would serve a much bigger role than ever before, thus making this his arc. In this section of the video, I will be detailing all of the things pointing towards this. Firstly, Zoro is a Japanese character. Obviously not literally, because there is no Japan in One Piece's universe, but Oda stated in an SBS that if Zoro were from a country on Earth, it would be Japan. As explained previously, the country and narrative of Wano is very strongly inspired by Japanese history and mythology, making it One Piece's Japanese arc. By virtue of that fact, you would expect the arc to have a strong focus on the only Japanese Straw Hat, especially with all the plot points suggesting that Zoro is originally from Wano. Out of every character besides Luffy, Zoro received the most panel time in this arc and even had multiple personal plot lines. We have never seen this for Zoro before. He developed his own relationships with the people of Wano, like Yasui, Hiyori, and Toko. His connection with Hiyori is especially interesting, considering how Oda usually writes the female damsel in distress archetype. In every arc where there is a princess that needs help, it's Luffy who develops a relationship with them and promises to defeat the main antagonist. We saw this with Vivi and Crocodile, Shirahoshi and Hody, Rebecca and Dofi, but in Wano it was Zoro that met and protected Hiyori. He swore to avenge Yasui's death and declared that he would cut Kaido into pieces, something we have never seen Zoro say about the main antagonist of an arc. He inherited the will of Oden through Enma, and the main flashback character's will being passed down is a formula that Oda sticks to pretty religiously. Zoro made the claim he will round up the samurai of Wano all the way back in Zoro, and even further back in Thriller Bark, it is through Zoro's fight with Ryuma that we learn of the existence of the Wano country, and Zoro expresses an interest in the samurai. Even the eye catchers in the anime adaptations suggested that this was Zoro's arc, given that it was only Luffy and Zoro who received eye catchers for over 2 years, something never before seen in the One Piece anime. On the Weekly Shonen Jump cover for chapter 921, we get this cover page of Luffy, Zoro, and Kaido. We received a very similar cover page in Whole Cake Island of Luffy, Sanji, and Big Mom. The text on the Wano cover reads, "Two pirates kill the evil spirits. suggesting a heavy involvement from Zoro in the fight against Kaido, similar to how Sanji had the role of handling Big Mom in Whole Cake Island. Where Sanji's specialty of food was utilized in subduing Big Mom, Zoro's specialty of fighting and swordsmanship would be his means of contribution. There are various different things pointing towards Wano being Zoro's arc, but I feel like this is enough for now. I don't want to spend too much time on each section of this video because it's already 44 minutes long and it will probably end up being over 10 hours if I just keep going like this. When it comes to ZKK evidence, this is easily the most important and riveting of everything that was gathered. In fact, without these magazine statements and other third-party information, I probably would have never believed in the theory. I've witnessed countless people be completely convinced that ZKK was a foregone conclusion just by seeing these magazine statements. That's how compelling this evidence really is. Of course, ZKK didn't happen, which has now turned me into someone who takes these third-party sources of information with a grain of salt, but at the time, there was no reason for me to doubt these sources. They were completely reliable in everything else, so why would this specific thing be untrustworthy? But that's besides the point, let's just dive right into this. In One Piece Magazine Volume 5, it is said, and I quote, "The opponent that Zoro defeated in Thriller Bark, Ryuma, is said by legend to have cut down a Western dragon with his sword, a sword that is now in Zoro's hands. In Punk Hazard, Zoro already killed a Western dragon as well. Now Zoro and the Straw Hats are in Ryuma's homeland, Wano, to take down one of the Yonko, Kaido. Now that Zoro has obtained Shusui from Ryuma after their duel, the possibility might arise that a new legend of slaying an Eastern dragon might be born." I know, crazy stuff. Kind of feels like it's spelling out ZKK once you take into consideration that Kaido is the only Eastern dragon in the entire arc. The main point of rebuttal I hear against this statement is that Zoro has already imitated Ryuma's feat by killing a Western dragon in Punk Hazard. There's various reasons this counterpoint is, for lack of a better word, dishonest. Not only was the magazine released years after Punk Hazard, but the quote directly references the Punk Hazard moment, which destroys all possibility of it alluding to that. And to hammer it down even further, there is a stark difference between Ryuma's feat and Zoro's on Punk Hazard. Ryuma's feat is that of legend. It is something fabled, something remarkable that had solidified his fame as the legendary sword god. Zoro, on the other hand, just slayed a dragon which nobody witnessed and nobody's gonna celebrate him for. It's just a meaningless moment in his life that holds next to no weight. If you're not familiar with Eastern dragons, this is how they look. Yes, just like Kaido. One of the most important things I took away from that statement in the magazine is that it says a new legend might be born. In order for something to go down in history and to be deemed legendary in the world of One Piece, it has to be massive. What could possibly be more fitting than slaying Kaido, the strongest creature as well as an emperor of the sea, to fulfill this statement in the magazine and serve as a legendary slaying of an Eastern dragon? This would further Zoro's position in the world, get him closer to achieving his goal of becoming not only the world's strongest swordsman, but a man whose name reaches the heavens, which is an aspect of his core motivation that is heavily under-recognized by the fandom. That isn't the only magazine statement though. There's another one that is arguably just as significant, but not many people have seen it because it wasn't translated by Arta over at the Library of Ohara, and he is generally the primary, if not the only, source of translations for this kind of information in the community. In One Piece Magazine Volume 6, there is a large focus on the lore surrounding Ryuma, and there's a quote in there that says, "Perhaps a strong samurai who people can call the second Ryuma has already been born." No character fits the bill for this as well as Zoro, but by the end of the arc, it turns out Luffy is the strong samurai this was alluding to. The second coming of Ryuma was Monkey D. Luffy. With the way all Zoro and Ryuma focus was completely disregarded, and this panel at the end of the arc was shoehorned in to make a Luffy and Ryuma parallel, I genuinely do believe Oda changed his mind about several things in the second half of the arc. On top of those magazine statements, there is more evidence coming from out-of-story sources of information that heavily contributed to the theory, such as Zoro's Vivre card released in September of 2021. carrying Oden's favourite sword Enma, a great swordsman who slays demons. From Hiyori, Zoro was entrusted with the beloved Enma of Kozuki Oden. It was, oddly enough, a sword made by Shimotsuki Kozaburo, the founder of his hometown Shimotsuki village, and a swordsmith from the Wano province. Whether he knows it or not, Zoro has given a deep connection with the past in Wano Kuni, and he sets off to Onigashima as it's not a pirate hunt but an Oni extermination. As one of the worst generation to bear the next generation, he will have to fight his way through 2 emperors. Now, of course, that isn't the best translation, but I've cross-referenced the Japanese rules with various translators, and the point of the SBS excerpt is the same. Zoro is described as someone who slays demons, and that he is set out to Onigashima not to hunt down pirates, but rather to exterminate an Oni. Kaido and Yamato are the only Oni on Onigashima, and of the 2, the latter is fighting with the protagonists, leaving Kaido as literally the only possible choice to be the exterminated Oni this Vivre card alluded to. In that exact Vivre card, it's also directly stated that Zoro's target was Kaido, using panels from the manga to support this claim. There's even more bits of information coming from SBS's Vivre cards and magazines, but those 3 are the most significant and relevant to the theory, and for time's sake we'll have to leave it at that. I've actually made an entire video on this topic in the past because I've always held the belief that Kaido needed to die. Right now, as it stands, half the community thinks he's dead and the other half thinks he survived because there's no real way to actually tell because of the way it went down. He was punched into a volcano, but is that really enough to kill Kaido? Who knows? There's a narration that suggests Kaido and Big Mom are dead, but how much of that can we truly believe? I guess we'll find out for sure someday, but that again is besides the point. There are countless reasons I have always believed Kaido should die. Firstly, if he didn't die by the end of Wano, what alternative conclusion is there for his character? In chapter 795, in Kaido's introduction, it pretty much spells out for you the reasons why Kaido needs to die. The man was captured 18 times but managed to escape every single one of them times. Sentenced to death 40 times, but when hanged, the rope snapped. Put under the guillotine, the blade cracked. When skewered, the spear broke. This is a man who wants to die, especially because he believes he cannot die. He tries to kill himself but fails time and time again. Oda is notorious for introducing characters a certain way and dismantling that initial impression he laid for them as time goes on. Above all this, the most compelling argument for why Kaido needs to die is that there is no alternative conclusion for him. Other than a character redemption where Kaido just magically stops caring about Wano and all of his ambitions and essentially becomes a good guy, how do you truly save Wano and deal with the threat of Kaido without killing him? The narration in his introduction makes it abundantly clear that you can't just capture Kaido and imprison him like you would expect of normal antagonists. This man cannot be imprisoned, he's just far too strong to be placed in such a position. Secondly, there was a heavy emphasis all throughout the arc of Wano on taking the head of Kaido. Decapitation was something alluded to on countless occasions. I mean, the panels speak for themselves. In the past, with every major antagonist of the arc, the focus was to beat them or defeat them, but never to take their head. This distinction was very clearly intentional and felt like set up for Kaido to be killed, specifically in the form of decapitation. Thirdly, the cover I spoke about not too long ago, which says 2 pirates kill the evil spirits. The Japanese word used is aki, which can also be translated to demon, and as we know now, Kaido is of the Oni race, making him a demon. This outright suggests Kaido will be killed by either Luffy or Zoro, or a combined effort from the 2. And lastly, contrary to popular belief, killing Kaido does crush his dreams, just in a more complex manner than usual. The The biggest argument I've heard against Kaido dying is that antagonists never get what they want in One Piece. The thing that needs to be understood about Kaido's dream to die is that it isn't that simple. I spoke about this earlier when we were doing the thematic breakdown, but death is Kaido's ultimate goal, sure. But before death, he wants to find the One Piece, build an army of Smile users, create the biggest war the world has ever seen, and turn the world into one of sheer violence. And once all of that has been accomplished, he wishes to die and cement himself as a legendary figure. The manner in which Kaido dies is far more important to him than death itself. Old Whitebeard did it right. Imagine losing a battle against an army 5 times smaller than yours, led by the very man you defeated without breaking a sweat just 2 weeks ago. Is that really a glorious death? I don't think so, and if Kaido could speak for me, I think he would agree. I have also made a video on this topic in the past, which can probably be said for everything in this video, but like I said at the beginning, I have grown so much both as a person and a creator since then, so please listen in, even if you've watched those videos and even if you're familiar with my talking points. Damn near everybody reading Wano was convinced that Zoro is a member of the Shimotsuki clan. The entire existence of Ushimaru alluded to this idea, despite the comment from Oda confirming he isn't Zoro's father. The statement specifically says father, which doesn't necessarily mean they can't be related. Ushimaru could have been his grandfather, or uncle, or even older brother somehow. It's uncanny how similar they look in terms of appearance. Zoro not only looks eerily similar to Ushimaru, but also Ryuma, who's another member of the clan. Zoro is from the Shimotsuki village in the East Blue. Zoro was born in November, and the month of November in Japanese is named Shimotsuki. The Shimotsuki are famed for their hardiness. I don't think I need to explain that one. This interaction between Hyogoro and Kawamatsu in chapter 1023, focused on Zoro's appearance, seems like an obvious setup for Zoro to have some kind of relationship to Ryuma, or just to the Shimotsuki in general. Why else would Oda include this page? In the SBS of volume 92, Oda revealed a ship that had sailed from Wano had reached the East Blue a few decades ago, and that fans were very familiar with one of the descendants of someone aboard the ship. Merely 4 volumes later, Oda reveals in the SBS of volume 96 that Shimotsuki village, Zoro's hometown, was in fact founded by Kozaburo Shimotsuki, who left Wano 55 years ago and landed in the East Blue to establish Shimotsuki village. That almost confirms that the ship Oda mentioned in volume 92's SBS was very likely Kozaburo's. It felt like Oda was working on a plotline involving the Shimotsuki daimyo that would tie in Zoro's true lineage. In the event of the rebellion, Ushimaru could have sent his children away with Kozaburo, or Ushimaru's children fled of their own accord, later settling in the newly founded Shimotsuki village and eventually giving birth to Zoro. The reason I always felt like Ushimaru was Zoro's grandfather and not his direct father is because Oda downright disproved that idea in SBS of Volume 101, right? But the manner in which he disproved that idea only served to strengthen my belief of Zoro being related to Ushimaru. Oda straight up hints at Zoro's lineage being touched upon at some point in the narrative of Wano multiple times, but by the end of the arc, we receive next to nothing. What we actually received is besides the point for this video, because the goal of this video is to explain why ZKK was such a massive and believable theory to me, and as I've just explained, there were countless things pushing in the direction of Zoro being a Shimotsuki, which is the foundation of this theory. Ryuma is not only a legendary swordsman within the One Piece universe, but he is a character Oda created years before he started writing the series. This is a character that clearly means a lot to Oda. He's one of the first characters that Oda ever modeled and designed. The reason Oda even wrote the story of monsters was because he simply wanted to draw a double-page spread of a dragon being slain by a swordsman. It's a concept that Oda is quite clearly fond of, and so I really expected to see that in his magnum opus. And I appreciate the fact that the Punk Hazard moment of Zoro slaying the Western Dragon definitely fits the bill in this regard, but there are clear distinctions between that moment and Ryuma's legendary feat of slaying a dragon that I will be talking about later on. There are various parallels between Zoro and Ryuma, from the fact that Ryuma is practically the spitting image of Zoro, to the point I believe Ryuma was the prototype model for Zoro's character. There's even more similarities, like the fact that both Zoro and Ryuma were accused as murderers and blamed for crimes they did not commit. In the one-shot Monsters, Ryuma meets a girl who was traumatized by a dragon and he goes on to slay that dragon. In Wano, Zoro meets Hiyori, a girl whose life was traumatized by Kaido, a dragon. The fact Ryuma and Zoro both share the exact same ambition, the hope to fight against the strongest swordsman in the world someday. That both Ryuma and Zoro have epithets they're given by others that they weren't aware of, like Ryuma being known as the king, whilst Zoro was known as a demon or the holy terror of the seas. And then there's a lot of tiny little similarities in their behaviors and characteristics. Like I just said, I truly do believe Ryuma was the prototype for Zoro's character, and so his existence is absolutely crucial to this theory. The consensus when it comes to Zoro's role in Wano was always that his storyline lies with Orochi, and his motivations are to get revenge specifically on Orochi for killing Yasui. I can see why fans would think that before Act 3, but even then, Zoro wanting to kill Orochi was never really something I bought into, because in the very same page where he expresses that, Hiyori's motivations for revenge are also set up. Hiyori slaying Orochi is a far more compelling narrative than Zoro being the one to do so for countless reasons, and I think Oda would agree, because Zoro and Orochi didn't have a single interaction in Act 3, and it was Hiyori, with the help of Denjiro of course, who was focused on Orochi. There wasn't really any focus on this by the end of the arc, but the existence of Ame no Habakiri and Enma were crucial to this theory. Ame no Habakiri is the blade famed for slaying Yamato no Orochi in Japanese mythology, the creature that Orochi's devil fruit is literally directly based on. It seemed obvious to me that since Zoro was given Enma, the sword specifically hyped as being the sword to give Kaido his only scar, that his storyline in Wano would involve fighting Kaido, whereas either Momo or Hiyori, whoever had Ame no Habakiri, would have fighting Orochi involved in their storylines. Even beyond this, the Oden flashback completely destroys the Zoro vs Orochi narrative with a single panel. After Oden's trust is betrayed by Orochi, instead of seeking vengeance on him, the focus is entirely on Kaido. Like literally, look at this panel. Their foe was Kaido and they paid heed to no other. Even in the raid, the Scabbards weren't considering Orochi as someone worth their time. The true oppressor of Oden and the Scabbards was Orochi. He was the mastermind behind all the cruelty they endured, but they didn't care because they understood that when it comes to fixing things, Orochi is so insignificantly weak that he is almost a non-factor. Kaido is the key to all of Orochi's plans. Without him, Orochi achieves nothing because he couldn't possibly hope to have the military force to back it all up. Someone as emotionally intelligent and battle smart as Zoro obviously understood this, because despite holding hatred for Orochi, the only person whose name he mentions before finally arriving at the rooftop is Kaido's. Chapter 997 is the perfect example of this. I didn't come all the way to this island to waste time on a bunch of nonsense. They say Kaido's the toughest guy in the world, so I'm here to slice him into pieces. Even earlier on, right at the beginning of Act 3, when we get the Luffy, Zoro and Appu encounter in chapter 980, we see Zoro visibly stressing about the fact he received damage because he wants to last until they fight Kaido. Even the damn Straw Hat spread at the end of chapter 989 has Zoro saying, "I just gotta get up to the rooftop where Kaido is," because all of his anger is directed towards him and he wants to fight him. Another thing that's worth mentioning when it comes to Zoro's motivations to take down Kaido is that although they weren't as defined as Kid's or Luffy's, they were still present and incredibly crucial to the narrative of the arc. The reason I say this is because Zoro intended to avenge Yasui. This is the same Zoro who back on Skypiea told Ohm that he doesn't seek revenge, that he doesn't like to fight with a motive. This is the first time in the series where Zoro felt a sense of animosity towards the primary antagonist of the arc. It's also the first time in the series we have seen Zoro develop such a strong bond with the innocent bystanders of the setting they are fighting for. Zoro during the Yasui execution of Act 2 is the most visibly infuriated we had seen him in all of post timeskip. His veins were popping out of anger towards the truth behind the smile fruits and of course the death of Yasui. And he also immediately lashed his anger out on Orochi, something quite unusual for somebody like Zoro who is generally quite calm and calculated. Zoro formed personal bonds with various people in Wano. Hiyori is a potential romantic interest for him, whom he protected from Kamazo. Toko had been around Zoro quite a bit in the pre-Onigashima section of the arc. He has protected her from danger on numerous occasions. Momonosuke learns from Zoro and looks up to him like an apprentice would their master. Yasui tags along with Zoro in Act 2 and attributes their encounter to fate, a hint that something more would come from this relationship. And on top of this, there's the very simple fact that killing Kaido would further Zoro's dream in a way that's meaningful and actually gives credit to the swordsman of the One Piece world, something that doesn't really feel like the case considering Zoro seems to be the only person outside of Mihawk who takes swordsmanship seriously. We know that simply becoming the world's strongest swordsman isn't enough to completely satisfy Zoro's dream. In his backstory, we see his dream continually evolve into something larger, finally ending in him wanting to become so famous that even heaven will hear of his name. What better way to etch Zoro's name in history than slaying Kaido, the Eastern Dragon, atop the flower capital and replicating Ryuma's legendary feat, the sword god Ryuma, who, interestingly enough, was the strongest swordsman in the world at the time, but despite that, is mostly known for his legendary feat of slaying a dragon, not for being the strongest in the world. Simply defeating Mihawk at the end of the story isn't enough to satisfy Zoro's ambition. A legendary feat such as killing Kaido though, that would have definitely complemented his ambitions. Despite being someone who died when Zoro was a baby, there are countless things that tie Zoro's character to that of Kozuki Oden's. There's a bunch of details about the two that are eerily similar to the point where I'm inclined to call them intentional parallels. I appreciate that confirmation bias is a real issue when assessing arbitrary evidence like this, but given the way Oda has always written using parallels and the sheer number of these parallels, I am confident that this was something intentional from Oda and a clear setup for Zoro and Oden's stories to converge somehow. Let's start with the most obvious. Zoro inherited Enma, one of Oden's two swords that were bestowed onto his children. Enma was intended for Hiyori and Ame no Habekiri intended for Momonosuke, but in chapter 955 it is shown to us that Zoro and Oden are the only individuals ever capable of taming Enma, at least among those who tried to do so, and so Zoro is given Enma. Zoro and Oden both take the blame for crimes they didn't commit, and as I mentioned earlier, this can be extended to Ryuma as well in the Monster one-shot. Zoro took the blame for the murders in the capital, Oden took the blame for the Mountain God incident, and Ryuma took the blame for summoning the dragon. Zoro and Oden both initially targeted Orochi, only to realize that Kaido was the true threat that needed to be dealt with. Both Zoro and Oden lash out and attack Orochi in a fit of rage, both using two-sword style attacks, only to be interrupted by Orochi's soldiers. Hiyori and Toki were both 26 years old when they met Zoro and Oden respectively. They meet them as damsels in distress in need of saving, and then those damsels nurse them back to health. Hiyori cries on Zoro's chest as he finds out the truth about the smile fruits, and Toki cries on Oden's chest as he finds out that his family has been targeted by assassins. The September 2021 Vivre card for Zoro that I mentioned earlier alludes to the fact that Zoro inherited Oden's will through Enma. The two biggest moments in the story for these two characters are moments of sheer courage and sacrifice. I'm of course talking about the nothing happened moment and the boiling pot moment. Both Zoro and Oden shouldered massive burdens and received no recognition for it. They take on seemingly impossible tasks that should have killed them, and they survived. And lastly, Zoro and Oden are the only people to successfully scar Kaido. Now, why does any of this matter? Well, the crux of Zoro killing Kaido as a theory is that Wano's conflict would be resolved through the incorporation of Oda's favourite theme, inherited will. Ryuma slayed a dragon and saved the people of Wano hundreds of years ago, and so Zoro would inherit his will and slay a dragon to save the people of Wano. Oden tried his very best to defeat Kaido and save the people of Wano 20 years ago, but failed, so Zoro would inherit his will embodied by Enma and slay Kaido to save the people of Wano in his stead. A crucial part of this theory is the importance of Enma as well as Ame no Habakiri. When Zoro is first offered Enma, there is an editor's note referencing inherited will. The absolute crux of ZKK as a theory is that the two swords of Kozuki Oden would free Wano from Kaido and Orochi's tyranny. Enma would be used by Zoro to slay Kaido, and Ame no Habakiri would be used by either Momo or Hiyori to slay Orochi, the two major oppressors of the country. This is probably the densest and most intriguing aspect of this theory. There is a lot of mythology, both Chinese and Japanese, incorporated into the idea of Zoro killing Kaido. I appreciate that a lot of people aren't too keen on this kind of evidence because there's no real way to prove if these are coincidental or intentional by Oda, but past evidences of mythological incorporation in One Piece is what makes this evidence believable to me. I spoke about some different examples of mythological or folklore incorporation into the narrative of Wano back in the structure section of this video, but even before Wano, in the different arcs of the series, there have been different mythological incorporations. For example, the Sun Tree is clearly inspired by Yggdrasil. Hancock takes heavy influence from Medusa. The poneglyphs are very similar to the Emerald Tablets. Enel takes inspiration from Raijin. King Neptune, the Flying Dutchman, Otohime and Toyotama Hime. The list goes on. There are so many mythological connections in One Piece that listing them all out would take me days, and this isn't special to just One Piece either. Various manga do this because Eastern culture is very in touch with its mythology, folklore and history. This isn't really the case in the Western world that most of us live in, which is why many people don't take this kind of evidence seriously in theories, but when looking at things through the lens of the creator, you have to appreciate the fact that these mythological stories had a major influence on them to pursue storytelling, and so it's fair to expect that to reflect in the stories they create, right? Anyways, this is a massive section of the video, so if you don't care to listen, the timestamps are in the description for you to skip through to the next section. I don't advise that because it really is very crucial to why ZKK ever existed as a theory, but of course it's entirely up to you. The story of Ramayana is one of two ancient Sanskrit epics in Hinduism. It follows the journey of Prince Rama rescuing his wife Sita from the clutches of Ravana with the help of Hanuman. For the purpose of this theory, I believe this story is very similar to Wano, and I'll be explaining why Zoro fit as Prince Rama, Kaido and Orochi fit as Ravana, and of course Luffy fits as Hanuman. Rama was the heir to a kingdom but left the country as a child. As I spoke about previously, it felt very likely that Zoro was the heir to the Shimotsuki daimyo but left the Wano country as a child. Rama's right hand, loyal follower and fighter was Hanuman. I believe this dynamic was flipped in One Piece. Zoro as Rama is the right hand, loyal follower and fighter to Luffy as Hanuman. Rama severs the head of Ravana. This would be replicated by both Zoro and either Hiyori or Momonosuke, who would slay Kaido and Orochi respectively with Oden's swords. Ravana was a 10-headed Oni. If you look at this picture of his appearance, it really feels like a combination of Kaido and Orochi. Ravana had a younger brother who betrayed him to join forces with Rama and Hanuman. This is referenced through Kaido's child, Yamato, who betrayed him to join forces with Luffy and the Alliance. Ravana took over a land of peace and prosperity and turned it into a kingdom of Onis known as Lanka. Kaido took over the land of Wano and rules over it from Onigashima. Ravana enslaved Sita without knowing her true identity. This is referenced by Orochi enslaving Komurasaki without knowing she was actually Kozuki Hiyori. And lastly, Hanuman was capable of defeating Ravana but let Rama handle him as it was his destiny. Jambava the Elder prophesied that Rama would be the one to kill Kaido. A big part of this theory is that it doesn't take away from Luffy, but rather it adds to him. Luffy would have proven he can defeat Kaido in a 1v1, but allowed Zoro to finish the job for one of several reasons. Either Luffy didn't want to kill Kaido himself, or he recognized that Zoro had more of a personal stake in this battle. Hyogoro and Kawamatsu's conversation about Zoro heavily implied he would carry out an act of fate in this arc, and of course Toki's prophecy can be interpreted to be talking about Zoro. I'll talk about that more in depth in the next section. Luffy's Bajrang gun is a direct reference to Hanuman. Bajrang is one of Hanuman's names. Hanuman's abilities included stretching, gigantification, and an immunity to lightning, all of which are abilities Luffy has. Hanuman's first father was Vayu, the god of wind. It's been theorized for years that Luffy's father, Dragon, has some kind of wind power. Hanuman's second father was Kasari, a monkey who received the title of Hero Chief after killing a demon with his bare fist. This is obviously referenced in One Piece through Luffy's grandfather, Monkey D. Garp, or Garp the Fist. And lastly, Wano was structured like a play, right? It had an act structure. The Ramayana is not only one of the largest epics in world literature, but it is currently one of the most popular plays in the world. So it would be fitting for it to majorly influence the only arc in One Piece that is structured like a play. The 5 Wisdom Kings are an integral part of Japanese Buddhism. I'm going to try not to butcher these names and I'll probably fail disgustingly, but they are Akala, the immovable king of the center, Trilokityawijaya, the king of knowledge of the east, Kundali, the dispenser of Amrita of the south, Yamantaka, the destroyer of death of the west, and Vajrayasaka, the king of light of the north. Kaido's attacks directly reference 4 out of 5 of these Wisdom Kings. In chapter 1009, he uses Conqueror of 3 Worlds, Ragnaroku, which is a reference to the King of Knowledge. In chapter 1037, he uses Kundali Dragon Swarm, which is of course a reference to the Dispenser of Amrita. And in chapter 1047, he uses Destroyer of Death, Thunder Bagua, which is a reference to Yamantaka, the Destroyer of Death. And lastly, in chapter 1024, he uses Vajra Arrow against Yamato, which is in reference to the King of Light. Interestingly enough, the only Wisdom King yet to be incorporated in an attack from Kaido is Akala, the immovable king of the center, which is also the most powerful and important of all the Wisdom Buddha. You could give various reasons as to why Oda may not have included this in the story, but honestly it's besides the point. Enma is the Japanese name for Yama, the mortal enemy of Yamantaka, one of the 5 Wisdom Kings. Since Zoro wields Enma, it ties him to Kaido through mythology. On top of this, various attacks of Zoro's incorporate Buddhist concepts, such as the Phoenix of the 108 Earthly Desires, the Crossing of 6 Paths, the 3000 Worlds, and of course Ashura. This is perhaps the most important part of all the mythological evidence gathered. The black tortoise, the vermilion pheasant, the blue dragon, and the white tiger are 4 incredibly important symbols within Chinese mythology. These 4 symbols represent various different things, and I do believe they are represented by a character in the narrative of Wano. The black tortoise being represented by Orochi, the vermilion pheasant representing the Kozuki clan, the blue dragon obviously representing Kaido, and the white tiger representing none other than Roronoa Zoro. I fucking hate that name. The black tortoise being Orochi is mainly derivative of its appearance in comparison to Orochi's. They look very similar. On top of this, the tortoise is associated with longevity and immortality, which suits Orochi as a character who kept coming back despite seemingly being killed. There are 2 reasons why I ascribe the vermilion pheasant to the Kozuki clan. Firstly, Hiyori's dress very strongly resembles a pheasant, and secondly, obviously the more significant of the 2, is that the Kozuki clan symbol is quite literally a pheasant. The blue dragon being represented by Kaido, do I really have to explain this? And finally, the tricky one to believe, the white tiger being represented by Zoro. There are countless things pointing towards this belief, the first being chapter 651's color spread, with Zoro being depicted as a tiger. That same tiger can be found on Oda's work desk in the form of a figurine. In the cover page of chapter 419, Zoro is being given directions by a tiger. In an anime filler scene, a one-eyed white tiger appears holding a sword in its mouth, alluding that Zoro is represented by a tiger. There's even more anime-only material alluding to ZKK, but the point is that this is a very interesting scene to look at, especially when taking into account the fact that Toei's anime director knew the ending of Wano all along. Looking at things from that perspective, it was very easy to believe that this was foreshadowing for ZKK. Why would they add this filler scene of Zoro fighting a tiger that is the spitting image of him with one eye and a sword in its mouth? Especially because we know that regular tigers, they exist in Wano, but Oda made Zoro encounter a white tiger specifically. And oh yeah, this shows up in the manga too, but it is left to a very small, unimportant panel. The anime scene adds some context, which includes the one eye and the sword in the mouth. The Chinese zodiac times come up on several occasions in Wano. The second hour of the bird was mentioned by Kinemon in preparation for the raid. The third hour of the bull was mentioned in regards to Ishimitsu Kozo, and the hour of the rat was also mentioned during Yasui's execution. There may even be a few other mentions, but I could only find these three. The hour of the tiger in the Chinese zodiac is between 3 AM to 5 AM, which is usually the time of dawn. Dawn. What does that remind you of? You guessed it, Toki's prophecy, and you shall know the brilliance of dawn. Like I said, I'll be talking about my interpretation of Toki's prophecy in depth in the next section of the video, but there's some food for thought for now. On top of this, there are two color spreads in the series that reference tiger vs dragon mythology, which is proof of Oda's acknowledgement that this conflict exists. The fact that one of the spreads has a classic Japanese themed art style further added to my belief that the tiger vs dragon mythology would have heavy connections to the narrative of Wano, in essence, Zoro killing Kaido. This isn't that important to ZKK, but Momonosuke killing Orochi is something I also put a lot of stock into because it ties into the rest of the theory very well, specifically the mythological aspects that I just outlined. Momonosuke asked Hitetsu before the raid to hold onto Ame no Habekiri, as at the time he wasn't ready. What better way to prove Momonosuke is ready and worthy of being shogun and concluding his character arc than slaying Orochi, the false shogun, with Ame no Habekiri? As mentioned previously, Ame no Habekiri, Oden's sword that was bestowed upon Momonosuke, directly translates to Snake Slayer, and it is the sword used by Susanoo to slay Yamato no Orochi in mythology. Orochi is the user of the Hebi Hebi no Mi, model Yamato no Orochi, a mythical Zoan type devil fruit that transforms the user into the Yamato no Orochi, the 8-headed snake or dragon in Japanese mythology. Momonosuke killing Orochi is an idea that ties various thematic and character beats of the story perfectly by being a satisfying conclusion to his character arc, and alongside Zoro killing Kaido, Oden's swords would have been inherited by the next generation and used to free Wano from the tyranny of Kaido and Orochi. You are the moon unaware of the dawn, and cast 9 shadows on the night woven of 20 years, and you shall know the brilliance of dawn. This part of the theory is insane, because my interpretation of Toki's prophecy would have downright confirmed Zoro killing Kaido, but then again the prophecy is so convoluted and intentionally abstract that numerous different interpretations could make sense. There's a lot of metaphors involved, but in order to make sense of the prophecy, we're going to allocate individuals to each component of this prophecy. Firstly, the moon. I believe the moon was in reference to the Kozuki clan supporters. This one's kind of obvious because Toki is telling the Kozuki clan supporters this prophecy and she says, "You are the moon." As we can see from the symbol on the scabbard's kimono, the Kozuki clan supporters are associated with the moon, and that honestly makes a lot of sense. Secondly, the dawn. Now, this is the most important part. I believe the dawn was in reference to Zoro. Now, I know that's going to piss a lot of people off, but this dawn is not the same as the dawn of the world. We all know that is in reference to Luffy. I'm talking about specifically Toki's prophecy. There are multiple reasons as to why this would have made a lot of sense. Zoro's kimono in Wano had the symbol of dawn clearly displayed on it. Zoro's name in Slavonic directly translates to hero of the golden dawn. As I said moments ago, the dawn is at the same time as the hour of the tiger, and I've already made it clear as to why I associate Zoro with the white tiger in Chinese mythology. And lastly, the prophecy says the moon is unaware of the dawn, which definitely makes a lot of sense, right? The Scabbards and the rest of the Kozuki clan supporters were unaware of Zoro's greatness or even existence. They would never expect this stranger to be the Dawn and be the savior that Wano has been waiting for. This is reflected in Kawamatsu's initial impression of Zoro, which gradually improves and turns into respect and admiration over time. Now, lastly, the 9 shadows that the prophecy is referring to. This is definitely the most confusing one because I think there are 2 valid interpretations that fit it and make sense. The first would be the 9 red scabbards, and the second would be Zoro's 9 sword style when he uses Ashura. Both of these fit the description for the prophecy and point to a conclusion that is Zoro killing Kaido. Let's read the prophecy again now. You are the moon, Kozuki clan supporters, unaware of the dawn, Zoro, and cast 9 shadows, either the 9 scabbards or Ashura, they both work, on the night woven of 20 years, the night of the fire festival, the raid on Onigashima, and you shall know the brilliance of dawn, Zoro. In a nutshell, what this says is on the prophesied night, the night of the fire festival, the Kozuki clan supporters will witness something truly brilliant, and I interpreted that to be the public slaying of Kaido atop the flower capital at the hands of Zoro. Thriller Bark and Wano have a variety of parallels, which makes a ton of sense, right? I mean, Thriller Bark is where Ryuma and the country of Wano are first introduced by name, even Kaido was directly mentioned and Big Mom indirectly. Thriller Bark is the arc where Oda probably started thinking about how he was going to write the Wano arc. Zoro gets a new blade in both arcs, Sanji fights invisible guys who showed extreme disrespect to women. The Straw Hats befriend the children of Yonko in the form of Lola and Yamato. The Oni are first introduced in Thriller Bark, and in Wano it is revealed that Kaido is an Oni. There's so much more that the fandom has discussed at length in the past, but here I'll be focusing on certain parallels that are rarely mentioned. To me, the most important thing that ties Thriller Bark and Wano together is that these are the only 2 arcs in the series where there are 2 major antagonists on a relative level of power and narrative significance. Both Kaido and Big Mom are equally as important in terms of threat and in terms of character importance. Luffy wanted to beat both of them. They're both Emperors of the Sea. In Thriller Bark it was Moria and Kuma, 2 members of the Shichibukai, but the parallels don't stop there. There is so much more that tie these 4 antagonists to each other. Kaido's parallels with Moria are as follows. Orochi and Kaido had a dynamic that was pretty similar to the dynamic between Hogback and Moria. Hogback's medical brilliance allowed for Moria to amass an incredible amount of corpses that were suitable for his army. With his skill, he modified the body of an ordinary girl, Sindri, into a capable warrior that was fit for battle. The role Hogback served for Moria is very similar to the role Orochi served for Kaido. As the Shogun of Wano, Orochi is the face that meets with the world government, which allows Kaido to make moves in the underworld and buy the smiles he desires to make his army. The massive stockpile of money and weapons that Orochi provides Kaido with are also a pivotal contribution to Kaido's war plans. Kaido and Moria both value the strength of their underlings greatly. They both seek out anything and anybody that can help them achieve their goals. Kaido uses smiles to build an army of monsters, and he also prefers to break the wills of his enemies and turn them into his subordinates rather than killing them. Moria uses the Kage no Mi to build an army of corpses, and has personally said before that he realizes the importance of superior underlings. And he stole Luffy's shadow in an attempt to make use of his power as a subordinate, similar to Kaido throwing Luffy in prison, but not exactly. Another cool little parallel between the 2 is the fact that both Moria and Kaido had underlings that were capable of using underhanded tricks through their devil fruits. Luffy and Oden both had to try and deal with these tactics firsthand when fighting against Moria and Kaido, and these tricks are made possible by those unique Paramecia devil fruits, the Mane Mane that belong to Higurashi, or the Horo Horo that belongs to Perona. And lastly, Kaido's top commander is King, who is a swordsman of the incredibly rare race of Lunarians. Moria's top zombie was Ryuma, who was a swordsman of legend from Wano. Now for Kaido's similarities with Kuma. They aren't as plentiful as the ones with Moria, but they're still very interesting. Kuma was an honourable man who kept his word with Zoro when they made their deal back in Thriller Bark. Kaido seems to have developed into an honourable man himself after his experiences with Oden in his final moments. I say this because Kaido apologises for Higurashi's actions and the dirty trick he pulled in the fight between himself and Oden, and then kills her himself. Kuma and Kaido also compromised with Zoro and Oden by giving them a seemingly impossible task to endure that they in fact ended up enduring. Kuma went back on his initial mission to capture Luffy and settled for Zoro if Zoro were to take all of Luffy's pain, which is something that should have killed him. Kaido also gave the Scabbards a chance at freedom only if Oden could withstand the boiling hot oil for an entire hour, both seemingly impossible tasks that both Zoro and Oden succeeded in. This isn't just a parallel between Kaido and Kuma, but it's a parallel between Zoro and Oden and the arcs of Wano and Thriller Bark themselves. Now when it comes to Big Mom and her similarities with Moria, things get even more interesting. Both Big Mom and Moria are gluttons. Both Big Mom and Moria have a devil fruit ability that allows them to extract something from an individual. Big Mom can take your lifespan and Moria can take your shadow. These abilities are used in very similar ways. Big Mom breathes life into inanimate objects and turns them into homies, whilst Moria breathes life into corpses by turning them into zombies. The importance of Big Mom in Wano was unfortunately pretty disregarded by not only the One Piece fandom but Oda himself. Luffy and Big Mom had unfinished business, and leaving her to be dealt with by Kid and Law was quite dissatisfying to me because of how long this conflict between Luffy and Big Mom was fleshed out. In terms of personal animosity towards each other, I honestly thought there was more going for Luffy vs Big Mom than Luffy vs Kaido, but at this point we have no concrete answers on Big Mom's status, and she could very well be alive and encounter the Straw Hats soon, so I'll hold off on criticizing that for now. The ultimate point of these parallels is that Luffy dealt with Moria and Zoro dealt with Kuma in Thriller Bark, and so as a piece of the larger picture that is this theory, my belief was that the biggest of these Thriller Bark and Wano parallels would be that Luffy would deal with Big Mom and Zoro would deal with Kaido in the end. And no, I don't mean this in 1v1 situations, of course they would be group battles, but the main and most decisive players of each battle would be Luffy and Zoro respectively. Binks Sake is a song in the canon of One Piece that was sung commonly by the pirates of old, and Brook, being a pirate of the old days, brought this song into our storyline in Thriller Bark. The importance of this song relates to Laboon. In the Rambao Pirates' dying moments, they play the song and record it using a tone dial so that one day post-resurrection, Brook can play the song for Laboon once more. And that's why we love it so much. Not only does the song sound amazing, but it has a really beautiful meaning behind it. But with the release of chapter 1043, the fandom began to notice a deeper meaning to the song, which seems to be the foreshadowing of key aspects of Wano's conclusion. We are looking at these two specific sections of the song, and I'm sure there are probably a ton of cool things packed into the other sections, but for the sake of this video, these two are what matters. Let's take a deeper look at each of these lines. Now comes a storm through the far off sky. The storm in this line describes Kaido. He is the storm that must be vanquished. I say this because he can manipulate wind and lightning, which quite literally constitutes a storm. Now the waves are dancing, beat upon the drums. This line is crazy because it's a clear reference to the drums of liberation. If you lose your nerve, this breath could be your last. This is describing exactly what happened to Luffy at the end of 1043. His voice going out, the way he is drawn, his eyes shaded out black. Luffy seemed to have died here and took his last breath. But if you just hold on, the morning sun will rise. And that's what happened. Luffy held on and his devil fruit awakened, causing him to return from the dead as Joy Boy, the morning sun, also known as the sun god, Nika. Today and tomorrow, our dreams through the night. This is describing the Fire Festival. In chapter 1042, we can see the people of Wano making their dreams fly, sending up fires into the sky, and literally making their dreams last through the night. Waving our goodbyes, we'll never meet again. Now, this line I still don't understand in relation to Wano because it had some scary implications, but I'm not sure how it ties into the end of Wano, and I never really had an explanation for this even when I still believed ZKK was a possibility a few months ago. And finally, this line. But don't look so down, for tomorrow night the moon will also rise. We know Luffy is the morning sun, he is Joy Boy, the sun god Nika, but who could possibly be the moon that will also rise? You guessed it, Roro no wa Zoro. Luffy and Zoro are the sun and moon described in the lyrics of Binks Sake, and they would fight together against the storm that is Kaido. Or at least that's what I believed at the time. Zoro was seemingly dead when those chapters were coming out. The mysterious page in 1038 with Zoro and the Grim Reaper, where he is screaming at it and can't move, seemed to be an indication of death. The overwhelming exhaustion caused by the Battle of Onigashima, as well as the mink medicine's after effects, caught up to Zoro, and he looked dead. In chapter 1042, Frankie says, "You ain't dead, are ya?" And Zoro's eyes were drawn in a way we hadn't seen before, until the next chapter, 1043, where Luffy also died and his eyes were drawn in the exact same way. Luffy the Morning Sun had been reborn through the awakening of his devil fruit. We still don't understand the logistics of that, but that is what happened. And following that, Zoro the Moon would also be reborn, or so I thought. None of it mattered at the end of the day, and it amounted in a Zoro and Sanji gag scene, so hey, I was wrong. Regardless, as I've said probably 50 times so far, the purpose of this video is to explain why I believed in ZKK, not why it should have happened or why it will still happen, because I don't even believe that. But let's get back to the Sun and Moon connections and explain the reasoning for Zoro being the moon. There are quite a few instances of moon symbolism surrounding Zoro. In fact, the first time we ever saw the moon in One Piece was in his flashback with Kuina, where it appears a whopping 6 times in only 7 pages. Zoro is also more than likely a member of the Shimotsuki clan, which directly translates to Frost Moon. Zoro's eye catcher in Wano really emphasized the moon, and we know in the real world, the sun and moon are considered partners, both vital to the existence of humanity. Zoro is Luffy's partner. If Luffy is the sun, it's only right for Zoro to be the moon, in the same sense that Ben Beckman is the moon to Shanks' sun. This section will contain a bunch of little evidence that doesn't really mean all that much by itself, but as part of the bigger picture, contributes quite a bit to the integrity of ZKK as a theory. Over the course of the series, many of Zoro's opponents have had some sort of dragon symbolism or connection incorporated into their characters. In the case of Mihawk, who is obviously inspired by Dracula, there's the fact that Dracula literally means son of the dragon. Mr. One had dragons on his clothing, and his bladed fingers resemble dragon claws. Ohm manipulated clouds just like typical Eastern dragons. Kaku was a user of the giraffe fruit, which in Japanese has the same kanji as Kirin. The Kirin is a mythical creature that heavily resembles a dragon. Ryuma had dragon in his name, as well as being the individual famed for slaying a dragon. And lastly, Shiryu, who Zoro hasn't fought yet but very clearly will by the time the Straw Hats face off against the Blackbeard pirates, also contains a dragon in his name. Hell is a recurring motif in relation to both Zoro and Kaido. Hiyori calls Wano Hell in chapter 943. Enma is described as the sword that splits the earth to the bottom of Hell. Kaido's presence is compared to Hell in chapter 984. Enma, the king of Hell, chose Zoro as its wielder, which resulted in Zoro proclaiming he is the king of Hell in chapter 1036. All of this is fairly arbitrary, but with full belief in ZKK happening at the time, it felt like foreshadowing for Zoro and Kaido's final showdown to me. For Zoro to split the earth to the bottom of Hell and decapitate Kaido. Kaido mentions that there will never be a monster samurai on the level of Oden again, which felt like indirect setup for him to be disproven, and who better to do so than the individual with an immense number of parallels to Oden, wielding one of his 2 beloved swords and inheriting his will. This was the hardest part of the video to write because it's not evidence based like the rest of the video, and I'm certain many people watching are going to take my personal thoughts with a grain of salt, which is why I chose to place this section towards the end of the video. If you're still here, thank you so much. It truly means the world to me that you would watch a video of my own creation for this long. Even if you're here to hate and laugh at me, thank you nonetheless for hearing me out, because that's all I want to achieve with this video. I just want my voice to be heard properly and for people to understand why ZKK was such a conceivable theory to so many people. You're probably wondering why I dedicated so much time in this video to talking about Wano's themes, since I barely tied it into the theory. Well, here we are. I believe Zoro killing Kaido would have been the perfect conclusion for this arc from a variety of standpoints. It would do right by both Zoro and Kaido's characters. It would serve as an all-encompassing thematic conclusion, and it would make use of various plot threads that seem to have been left in the dust by Oda. I understand this is a very bold claim to make, and I don't want you guys to get the impression that I think I'm better than Oda in any way, but it's just how I feel, and I'm always going to be honest about my opinions on media. I mean, it's just media. Don't get me wrong, some stories mean the absolute world to me, including One Piece, but that doesn't mean I'm ever gonna lie about what I like and what I don't like, or what I think should have happened given my perception of the narrative. But that is incredibly crucial for you to understand. This is my perception of Wano. This is what I see, what I understand, and I could very well be wrong. I am more than open to being proved wrong, so if you do disagree with me, and if you see things differently, please let me know why in the comment section below. I will make it my mission to read and reply to every single one of them. I outlined the 8 core themes of the Wano arc earlier on in the video, of course not including One Piece's golden trio of dreams, friendship, and freedom, which is the bread and butter of the series from a thematic standpoint and is prevalent in every single arc. Let's look at how ZKK ties up some of the themes I outlined in a coherent and satisfying fashion. There are various ways ZKK appeals to this theme. Of course, the most obvious being that it would conclude Kaido's character arc with a death that he didn't consider impressive in the same vein as Roger, Whitebeard, and Oden's deaths, whom he revered. This theme also ties into the fact that Zoro seemingly died and would have been reborn. Considering the similarities, Zoro would have been viewed as the second coming of Ryuma, in a fashion similar to how Luffy was reborn as the second coming of Joy Boy. What better way to prove the value of subordinates than to have one of the 2 major antagonists of this arc be killed not by Luffy, the leader of the Alliance's side of the battle, but by his right-hand man. Not only would it highlight the value of Luffy's subordinates, but it would also drive home the differences between Luffy and Kaido as leaders. Kaido viewed his subordinates as tools for the big war he wishes to start, whereas Luffy views his subordinates as his closest friends, people he would sacrifice his life for in the blink of an eye, and who would do the same for him. We all know one of Zoro's defining character traits is his loyalty to Luffy and the rest of the Straw Hats. Big Mom and Kaido's alliance was very poorly built, there doesn't seem to be any mutual trust, and it kind of came out of nowhere. After 3 days and 3 nights of battle, they just ended up deciding they will team up. Considering how massive betrayal was as a theme in the arc, it felt very likely to me that Big Mom would betray Kaido or vice versa. Luffy and Zoro sticking together through this battle despite overwhelming odds, coming back to life from the dead, as well as Big Mom and Kaido turning on each other when things are going south, would be the perfect statement on the differences between our protagonists and our antagonists. It ties up the theme of loyalty and inversely betrayal pretty perfectly in my opinion. This is one of the themes that ZKK doesn't really tie into, but in terms of Zoro's characterization in Wano in relation to how he felt about the oppression the innocent people had gone through, it would still be touched upon through ZKK. Zoro has made various bonds in this arc, and for the first time, he's not just fighting for himself or for the crew, he's fighting for the freedom of the people of Wano and out of genuine anger for the oppression they have suffered. The Oshiruko moment right at the start of the raid is a good example of this. Both Luffy and Zoro were pissed at the fact that the Beast Pirates were intentionally wasting food, the exact same food that brought Tama to tears. Another example is Zoro's reaction to seeing Kiku's arm, which made him arguably the most furious we have ever seen him in the entire series. Having Zoro play a pivotal role in Kaido's defeat adds meaning to these moments that felt like clear setup to me, but like I said, the theme of freedom and inversely oppression is one that doesn't really tie into ZKK as strongly as the others. I believe ZKK would have tied into the passage of time theme pretty perfectly, considering the whole idea of Zoro being the second coming of Ryuma, as a descendant of the same clan who also had his sword at one point. It would feel as if Ryuma's will transcended time and protected his country from an oppressive dragon once again. This would be executed in a similar fashion to the finale of Skypiea, with Noland and Kalgara's wills transcending time and being embodied by people 400 years after their deaths. It just sounds like classic Eiichiro Oda to me, especially with all the theories floating around about Ryuma being from the Void Century and having some sort of relationship with Joy Boy, further enhancing Luffy and Zoro's dynamic. This one should be very simple to understand. Killing Kaido is an outrageous display of Zoro's immense strength of spirit, and it wouldn't just be about Zoro, but it would mean so much to the people of Wano for this to happen at the hands of a samurai who was originally from the country. Zoro killing Kaido would make a massive statement on willpower, on samurai code, on never giving up, especially after all the damage he accumulated throughout the arc. It ties back to that story of the koi fish climbing the waterfall. Perseverance and persistence through everything, despite overwhelming odds, is exactly what the Wano arc is all about. I have explained all throughout this video the different evidence we have gathered in support of ZKK, and a lot of it really boils down to how ZKK would feel like an act of fate. From Toki's prophecy, Kawamatsu directly stating that Zoro's presence in Wano could have been an act of fate, the Shimotsuki connections, the Ryuma and Oden connections, the fact that Zoro had Enma, the potential Binks Sake connections. All of these things tie into the theme of destiny pretty perfectly. I mean, just look at it like this. A boy originally from Wano finds himself as the right-hand man of a pirate crew despite originally hating pirates and making a name for himself as a pirate hunter. 2 years later, he finds himself back in his homeland, which he doesn't know is his homeland, to aid in fulfilling the dreams and goals of his captain, only to find out that this is his homeland, it's his motherland, and Kaido, the tyrant currently ruling over it, is the man responsible for the deaths of his parents. Even if Zoro never found out the truth about his lineage, this is such an appealing narrative that strongly speaks to the theme of destiny. And lastly, of course, the most obvious of all the themes explored in Wano, the theme of identity. I mentioned this time and time again in the last few minutes, so I kind of feel like I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but Zoro's Shimotsuki lineage and how that ties into Wano's narrative is exactly how ZKK ties in with this theme. It's pretty cool how for each of these themes there's a very noticeable overlap between my arguments because Wano's thematic framework is very interconnected. All of these themes work together, they complement each other. Zoro being a Shimotsuki would tie into death and rebirth, the passage of time, destiny, and identity, and just one of the countless elements that contribute to this theory. Before ending the video, I want to address as many of the common counterpoints as possible because there's a lot of things people have used to discredit ZKK as a theory in the past, but there are very reasonable responses to all of those rebuttals. I've made a collab video with the homie Jagan on this topic, make sure to check that out in his channel, which I've linked in the description below if you want a more in-depth discussion surrounding this, but I'll be talking about a lot of those ideas right here, right now. The most common counter-arguments I've heard for ZKK over the years are that there are many characters with a more fleshed out connection to Kaido, the Straw Hats don't kill their enemies, antagonists rarely die in One Piece, King is a dragon, why can't Zoro kill King, and Zoro will never outshine Luffy. Let's break these all down one by one. Firstly, the more fleshed out connection to Kaido. Specifically Luffy and Kid, because I know a lot of people expected one of them to be the one who ultimately killed Kaido. I'd say if you're going to use that logic of a more personal and fleshed out connection to Kaido, then Denjiro, Ashirodoji, Kinemon, or any of the scabbards really have more right to be the ones who kills Kaido than anybody else, and we all knew that would never happen. My perception of Wano over the last few years was that the constant proclamations from Luffy and Kid about being the ones to defeat Kaido felt like red herrings. They made the claim so many times, it sort of reached a point for me where I just couldn't believe it anymore because it felt intentionally misleading. On the other hand, all the setup for Zoro being the one to do so was incredibly subtle and implicit. You wouldn't see it coming at first, but had it happened, it would have made perfect sense in hindsight with a lot of foreshadowing going for it. Secondly, the fact that the Straw Hats don't kill their enemies and antagonists rarely die in One Piece. This is the most understandable counter-argument because it's undeniably true. But why does that have to be the case at all times? There have been big deaths in One Piece before. The only arc other than Wano that received a similar amount of build-up was Marineford, and in that arc we received the two biggest deaths of the series. Of course, it was protagonists dying at the hands of villains, but that only adds to the believability that Oda would kill Kaido, considering that he killed fan-favorite characters, and Kaido is someone who we have been made to detest, and his entire goal is literally death. Kaido's a very special case when it comes to antagonists because, like I mentioned in the previous Why Kaido Has to Die section, everything about his character right from his introduction seemed to be pointing in the direction of death for his conclusion, just not the death he wanted. And on top of that, Zoro has canonically killed before. It's not a big deal and it's not something we saw on screen, but in Alabasta it is revealed that the previous Mr. 7 was killed by Zoro upon trying to forcefully recruit him. Crocodile also stated that Zoro killed 100 people in Whiskey Peak, but this is kinda hard to believe because we didn't see it happening and we can't really take Crocodile's word for it because the way Oda writes death is very conservative. We see some people from Whiskey Peak on cover pages later on in the series, so yeah, don't really know what Oda was doing there. But Kaido is a very special case like I've explained. He is a very unique case. He is too powerful to be stopped without being killed or being redeemed. And I think the choice between death and redemption is pretty easy to make. Thirdly, King is a dragon. Why can't Zoro kill King? This counter-argument is the product of people not really understanding ZKK to begin with. It's not about Zoro killing Kaido, but rather about a new legend of slaying an Eastern dragon being born, as stated in the magazine. I never really took this counter seriously, which is hilariously ironic, because I think Oda agrees with it, since Zoro vs King is where we got the Ryuma parallel, but I digress. And lastly, Zoro will never outshine Luffy. I've always found this counter to be pretty stupid because the Zoro killing Kaido many of us envisioned doesn't outshine Luffy at all, both to the audience and in the One Piece universe itself. For the audience, the point of this theory isn't that Zoro would have a more impressive showcase in the arc by killing Kaido, but mostly about Zoro dealing the ultimate blow, the killing blow, as an act of fate. Luffy would still have his 1v1 with Kaido, he would still use Gear 5th and prove himself to be a Yonko caliber individual. Luffy and Zoro would have a relative focus narratively speaking, which seemed to be Oda's initial goal from the outset of the arc, given how both Luffy and Zoro had about equal screen time and focus during the first two acts. Just take a look at Whole Cake Island. Luffy and Sanji have equal focus in terms of the narrative, and Sanji deals with the Yonko of that arc through his skill set of cooking, which adds a lot to the idea that Zoro would ultimately deal with Kaido through his skill set of swordsmanship. Within the world of One Piece, the idea that Luffy's right-hand man killing Kaido would outshine Luffy is absolutely asinine. We have seen time and time again in the story that the captain of a crew is simultaneously credited with the accomplishments of their subordinates. A clear example of this pertaining to Luffy and Zoro in particular is Sabaody, where Urouge outright says his captain must be something else after seeing the type of man Zoro was. If there are any other counterpoints you have for ZKK or you disagree with my rebuttals on the ones I just spoke of, please let me know in the comment section below because I am more than open to changing my mind on these things, especially since the arc is over now and I'd actually love not to feel like this theory was the perfect ending that we never got. And there it is, damn near 2 hours of me talking about a theory that is literally never going to happen. It's pretty funny to think about, but like I said at the start, I had to make this video because before I can continue making content on this channel, I just have to own it. I have to take the L on this and address everything. Thank you so much to everybody who has supported me over the last few years in regards to ZKK. Even if you never believed in the theory, I greatly appreciate the people who recognized the possibilities and didn't act like it was something completely blasphemous to believe in. This theory has honestly been a huge learning experience for me. You can never know what someone's going to do. You can make educated guesses based on how things seem to be, but you can never be absolutely certain on something that involves another person's decision making. And this isn't exclusive to just fictional stories either. Even in daily life, this experience of believing in ZKK so strongly for so many years, only for it to not happen, has provided me with a lot of growth and maturity. As humans, each and every single one of us are unique. We all think differently. The way we perceive things comes from our worldview, shaped by our life experiences. We are ultimately products of our environments and personal desires. You can never be certain about the things going on in someone else's head, because the things that lead you to that are from your own head, your own unique perspectives that other people couldn't possibly understand to the degree that you do. I just hope that with this video I have presented my own perspective to an efficient degree, and you guys can understand why I believed in this theory so adamantly. Trust me when I say I will never be putting my stocks into something like this again, at least not all of my stocks, but I also wouldn't change a single thing about the last couple of years believing in ZKK. The time I've spent theory crafting and discussing this theory with hundreds of different people have been some of my best times in any anime-manga community, and for that I will always be grateful. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching, and I hope this video accomplished its purpose.